Hey, welcome back. I'm excited to share my conversation with none other than Jamel Shabazz, a legend in street photography. Today, we dig into his life story, his motivations, and how he's going to commemorate his 50th anniversary of photographing the streets. So, get comfortable because this is a good one.
All the times it was raining outside, it was cold, I took to the subway. Not because I just like the subway, but because the lighting is good, and then you out of the cold and the rain, the elements. So the subways is like my galleries. I love the subway. There's never a dull moment in the subway. When I look through my lens, that's the picture I'm looking for.
Jamel Shabazz.
Jamel Shabazz.
Jamel Shabazz.
Jamel Shabazz.
Jamel Shabazz.
I had never seen a book like back in the days before.
No one was able to get shots like that back in the days. It was like a visual diary of my life. You know what I mean? When you look at those pictures, you look at seconds of my life.
Nothing says more New York than this. One of the most important documents which relates to New York urban culture and hip-hop culture.
The cornerstone of the hip-hop culture book.
This is hip-hop, and Jamel Shabazz captures the culture.
Right there. That's a picture right there. That's old school.
The millisecond that he decides to press that shutter down. Hey baby, that's it.
Today's video is a special one because if you've never heard of this photographer, I share with you back in the days, one of his first photo books. In addition, I get a chance to speak with the legendary photographer and visit his recent exhibition at ICP in New York City. Fellow creatives, I introduce Mr. Jamel Shabazz. Jamel, thank you for giving me some of your time. I remember the first time I saw your photos was in the Source magazine back in high school, and I'm so excited to chat with you in hopes of putting some inspiration out there because you are one of my photography heroes, and I'm honored to have you here today.
Well, Jay, I really appreciate that.
So, Jamel, let's start at the beginning. Was your father the main driving force for your start in photography?
I would say that it was. You know, I grew up in the Red Hook section of Brooklyn, and I have to say, my father created an environment that art was everywhere. You know, he collected art, so there was art on the wall. He converted our small apartment into a studio on the weekend where he would photograph family and the neighbors. He had a comprehensive library of photography books. And one book that really, but before I get to that particular book, one of the things that my love for photography came early on due to the family photo album that was passed on from generation to generation. And my father took great pride in having those albums. You know, he would create collages, but they were very special. I used to watch him as he would put them together, and he put a lot of care in that process. For me, it was very deep because this is my family, and I got a chance to see my lineage and where we came from. It's through those photographs I saw that my grandfather was in World War II in Burma, and my other uncle was stationed in Pearl Harbor. And that was really important to me to just have this visual history. So my appreciation came early on at that point. Then I had an uncle, you know, who was also a photographer. And every time we would have family gatherings, he would have his camera and he would take pictures. And then for special holidays, he would hook up the slide projector and show us these incredible slides that he took. And that really blew me away because not only am I seeing the family photographs, but now I am a part of this history. You know, so, and this is in the single digits, but what really helped to shape my vision was really Life magazine. I was born in 1960, so there was a lot going on. The assassinations, the war in Vietnam, the civil rights movement. One of the publications that really enlightened me at a very young age was Life magazine. And I remember going to the barbershop, and there would be stacks of Life magazines there, and I would just start to open them up and just look through them. And in that process, I started to gain a greater understanding on the war in Vietnam and different things that were going on in this country in general. And that developed. So Life magazine to me is equivalent to what the internet is today. Through that publication, I saw photography, I saw landscapes, I learned a lot of history. And then I took it to the next level. I started to read National Geographic magazine. So when my partners were reading comic books, I'm reading Life magazine and National Geographic, in addition to the fact that my father had a subscription to Playboy magazine. So I would go through those publications as well as at a young age. And it's through those publications not only am I looking at beautiful photography and I'm learning about light and composition, but I'm also reading the history. I'm reading all of the interviews. So at this young age, unbeknownst to my father, I'm taking all of this in, and now I'm more and more. I'm more curious about everything now. So I'm spending a lot of time in the library, just looking at more photography books and just trying to gain a greater understanding on what's going on in the world. But then one book changed me. And for whatever reason, despite all the books that my father had in his wall unit, there was one book that sat on our coffee table, and that was Black and White America by Leonard Freed. This one book will have a transformative effect on my life at the age of 9 years old. And what really drew me to this book was the fact that it was on the coffee table next to the family photo albums, but when I opened it up, it was signed with Leonard Freed's signature in it. So that made me realize that this is a very special book. So I started to go through the pages of the book at 9, 10 years old. And it gave me a glimpse into a world outside of my Brooklyn community. I saw Harlem for the very first time in photographs. I saw segregation for the first time. I saw a prison for the first time. I saw a black soldier sermon in Germany in the 1960s that reminded me of two of my uncles that were stationed in Germany. And then I started to read the book. And in reading the book, I learned about segregation and Jim Crow. I vividly remember being young, having a dictionary by my side and a pen and paper and writing down words that I wasn't familiar with, that I wasn't being taught in school, like Jim Crow, lynching, rape, and words of that nature. And through that book, I started to realize that this book is kind of like tailor-made for me. This is a roadmap that's going to help me as I navigate through life. So I'm 9 years old now, and I'm taking all of this in. So my appreciation for photography started at that age. And every time I went to the library, I was just constantly looking at photography books. It wasn't until I was 15 years old I actually physically picked up my own camera and started shooting. And that's a whole nother dynamic.
So tell me the story behind your first camera. Whose camera was it, and how did that come about for you?
The very first camera that I used was my mother's camera. She had two cameras in the house that she used for photographing parties. She had a Kodak Instamatic 110 and a Kodak Instamatic 126. And any given time, both those cameras had film in them. I knew now I couldn't touch my father's Nikon cameras. So what happened was, what really got me into photography later on and made me start to pick up her cameras was a friend of mine's had a cousin that was an official in a gang called the Jolly Stompers. And he told me that, I want you to meet my cousin. You know, he's a very powerful person, and I think you'll find him interesting. So he brought me to his cousin's home who lived not too far away, Cornell. And what blew me away with him was he's about 2 years older than me. He held a position in this notorious gang, but he had these giant photo albums like Yellow Pages, old Yellow Pages back in the days. And when I opened up those books, it was of his gang. And unlike the images that we see of gangs, traditional gangs with the cut-off jean jackets, with the fur collars, with the information on the back, these gang members were known, the Jolly Stompers, because it was a mix between African Americans and Caribbeans. That they brought both cultures together. So they were very stylish in their dress. They wore beaver hats, Kangos, British London frock coats, British walkers. They were clean, and it blew me away because unlike the previous photographs I saw that didn't really represent my community other than my family photographs, I saw something that really grabbed me. And this is something I was able to identify with. And when I saw these beautiful images of the crew, well-dressed, posed up against backgrounds, that made me say, I want to be a photographer just like that. So I remember leaving Cornell's house. I went home, I snatched up my mother's camera, and I went on to photograph my partners. I'm about 15 right now, and my whole crew was pretty much graffiti artists. And we were mixed between Black, Dominican, Cuban, Jamaican. It was a good mix. So I started photographing them in a very similar manner that I saw Cornell's pictures in. And it was a really interesting project. And it's like, that's when the magic happened. When I looked through that viewfinder, clicked it, and then took it to the local drugstore and got the work processed, I was hooked, and it immediately gave me a purpose now. So I went from being nobody to now I have a purpose. And then I used my voice to connect with people, to photograph them, to compliment people. And it was start my path at that early age.
You know, one of the main things that I try to instill in my students is confidence in their abilities. And in looking at your work, there's a sense of confidence that comes across. So what was like your goal when you went out with your camera in hand?
I think what was important for me early on was to be honest with you, I wanted to be a light. And photography gave me a voice to reach people because I grew up during a very violent time, and a lot of lives were being lost. A lot of young men were dying at the hands of other young men. So I came into a consciousness really early on. The same year I picked up the camera, I picked up the autobiography of Malcolm X, and that book enlightened me to a world and just the struggles that particularly people of color were going through. And I wanted to lend my voice and be a part of that conversation. I wanted, because I saw the prostitution, the heroin, the war in Vietnam, and it really did something to me psychologically. And I just wanted to be, I wanted to be a part of the solution. So my work was about engagement. The photograph became evidence of the conversation. What was more important to me was to engage you, especially as time progressed. And when I first started out, it was about just kind of appreciating the joy of photography. But when I came home from the Army in 1980, I came home to a war zone. And I needed to lend my voice to connect with people. So I knew I had to talk to people first. Let me build relationships. Let me introduce myself to you. I want you to know I just came home from the military, you know what I mean? And I was away for 3 years. And I'm very pained with the things which I'm seeing. And let me share with you some of the experiences in which I went through. So my main objective was to try to really enlighten a lot of the young men and women about what was going on, to speak about the importance of education, to be clean, to prepare for the future. And then the photograph became evidence of the conversation. So it's about connecting. And one of the books that my professor turned me into early on that was very instrumental in this process was a book by Gail Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. So once I read that book, I knew the importance of communication. So I love meeting people because I felt that, to me, the camera was two things. It was a recording device, but it was also a compass. And I believe that the people I met were people I needed to meet for whatever reason. And I've always felt that way. I don't know why we met, but it's going to make sense later on. So I always want to engage people in conversation to kind of like figure out why we met. And then there's other times I was curious, and I knew that everybody had a story. So a part of my exchange was I wanted to find out why we met, and especially with a lot of the older men. I wanted to know if they was in Vietnam. So it became a conversations. And I made a point to it wasn't too long-winded because I didn't want to bore people. I just wanted people to be relaxed and let them know who I was. And I want to let you know I'm curious on who you were. And my intentions are sincere. I want to record this moment because it's going to mean something as time goes on. I'm giving you a photograph. There's no strings attached. I just felt that we met on this path of life for a reason. And many years would pass. And now I realize after 20, 30, 40 years why we met on this path, because so many friendships were born out of that relationship, out of people I just met for a few minutes. We stayed in contact with each other based off the language of photography.
Yeah, I mean, those strangers for you, they became friends. Can you share a bit more about your father? I know that he was a photographer, and it sounds like he put you through the ringer, didn't he?
He really did. My father was a military man, and he learned photography in the Navy. He went to the United States Naval School of Photography, and that was his job. He served on the USS Intrepid, and it's through his photographs that I saw my father's vision, because he traveled throughout the Mediterranean on the ship, and I was really intrigued with that. But when I came home, and then at the same time, as I shared earlier, he created an environment where photography books were all over. I was constantly looking at that books, between the photography books, the encyclopedia, the visual language was ever present in my household. So I was constantly being stimulated with images. But it wasn't until I came home from the Army that he saw I had a Canon AE1 now, which I didn't know how to use, and that bonded us. So he took time to show me the whole process, to help me understand light and speed. A friend passed on an Omega Enlarger to me, and then we created a dark room in our laundry room, and he taught me the fine art of development. He instructed me to revisit the book Black and White America by Leonard Freed, and he also instructed me to read the whole entire Time Life of Photography, Time Life of book series here, and go through all of them, which I did. I went through the whole entire, it might have been about 8 books. And he instructed me to read all of them, to learn about light, composition, developing, themes, the different photographers, journalism, war photography. I mean, he drilled me hard. And then he instructed me to go out and use Tri-X black and white film. He first gave me an assignment that I found very boring. He says, what I want you to do is document the neighborhood. No people, just walk around and photograph what you see. And I did that, and he wanted me to understand light. And it's funny too, because he used to challenge me on, we'd go outside, and he didn't really work with a light meter. He mastered just looking at the light, and he knew exactly how to set his aperture and shutter speed. And he drilled me on that to the point where it became second nature to me. Like, how would you shoot this light? What would you put your settings on? So he drilled that within me, and he would have me photograph the neighborhood. When the prints would be done, he would look at them with what do they call, the grease pencil, and he would make corrections. He would write over them, you need to work on your lighting, your composition here. And he instructed me. He was a very hard teacher, because I would come home excited about certain work that I created, and he would look at it and he would just go through them and say, garbage, garbage, garbage. I'm like, wow, I took offense to that. But it helped me to understand how to see better. You know what I mean? And you got to go beyond the snapshots. You got to study the greats and see what they did, and you got to understand composition. Everything shouldn't be posed. You got to understand how to capture different candid moments. So he groomed me on that. One of the greatest lessons that my father gave me that really helped me throughout my entire career, he says, carry your camera everywhere you go with the cap off, and always have it set, for the most part, at 1/25th of a second at 5.6. Rather it's 400 film or 100 film, and then you make the adjustments as you go on. But always have that camera out, ready, locked and loaded, and just observe. And then he taught me the importance of themes. So the giving me the idea of themes gave me focus now. So he says, whatever it is, create themes for yourself. So that allowed me to just look at the subway system. So you know what? I'm going to focus on the subway system. I'm going to master every aspect of it. I'm going to shoot inside the train, outside the train, every aspect of the train station, the New York City transit system. I'm going to document. I'm going to focus on hats, fathers and sons, twins. So the idea of themes gave me clarity on how to move forward. So those are some of the great lessons that he gave me to stay with me all the time. Keep that camera with you everywhere you went. Because my father always had a camera with him. He was known as the cameraman. And that was very instrumental in me capturing some of my most iconic photographs based off that idea.
This right here. This is my favorite because it's so many elements here. First, this is an area in which I did a lot of shopping back in the days. I started coming to Lancashire Street back in 1975 to buy a lot of my clothing. So it's been an area in which it's been a part of my life for almost 50 years right now. And then my love for dogs. So on this particular day, and I have to, before I go on, I have to rewind a little bit. It goes in accordance with my father's teaching. And this image really reflects that. My father told me, carry your camera everywhere you go, always have it set, and have the cap off. So on this day, I'm on the Lancashire Street, and I followed his instructions. If you notice in the background, it's raining. But despite the rain, I had my camera out, I had it set, and I just had a feeling that I was going to see something. And as I'm walking, I see this gentleman with his dog, and I'm feeling something's going to happen. And sure enough, he started swinging his dog. I got off 3 frames, and I was able to capture this photograph here. What's so amazing about this shot here is that today, in 2024, this is a reflection of me and my dog. I have a dog that looks very much like him, and this is the relationship that we have on any given day. So it's amazing that this photograph I took over 40 years ago is now a part of my life, and this is my journey.
Being ready is half the battle in
always.
Most things, especially in photography. I was raised in Brooklyn, and that's what drew me to your work at first. How did living in Brooklyn, influence your style?
What was interesting about that time period for me, I lived in a mix between an African-American and Caribbean community. So I was exposed to a lot of different cultures. The East Flatbush neighborhood, we had Dominicans, we had Jamaicans, people from St. Lucia, Grenada, all these different cultures. So that opened up my curiosity to want to learn a lot more. So we had that. Music was very instrumental to my growth and development. It was a lot of conscious music back then. And just like the people from different cultures, I was introduced to different types of music, from salsa to reggae to jazz. So all that kind of like put me on a particular path, and I was just curious. I had a lot of curiosity about life and people, and I wanted to just venture out and just learn. And Brooklyn is a very large borough, and it was always something going on in that area for me. It's like I spent about really 10 solid years documenting the whole of Brooklyn before I even really branched out, because there was just so many areas, from documenting Brownsville, Bed-Stuy, Fort Greene, Red Hook, Coney Island. It was just an abundance of places and people to capture. That really contributed to my appreciation of different cultures, just living in Brooklyn, because we had so much there. And then once I started to branch out, I was intrigued with other cultures and then other communities, and I would just go further. But Brooklyn was like my basic training. Once I was able to get it in Brooklyn, through walking the different streets, connecting with the different people and cultures, going to different areas, it prepared me for all the other areas. Because it's like once you could deal with that and connect with people that you don't know and navigate those trains, walking the car to car, back in that day and time, that was my training up close and personal. And once I was able to do that, everything else is pretty much easy.
I had a job in Flatbush giving out pamphlets for a liquor store, and I have so many great memories of growing up in Brooklyn. But what was it like to start capturing outside of Brooklyn for you?
It was going back to the idea of different themes. So now, since I'm traveling out, I did a lot of shopping on Delancey Street, Delancey and Orchard. So now I'm learning about this new area of the Lower East Side, and it's historic, the history behind it. So now I said, let me start documenting this particular area. So being I spent so much time, I would just walk the different streets and photograph different aspects of that particular community, from prostitution to the merchants to the graffiti artists to just all the life that existed in that particular area. Then I discovered the West Village and the East Village. So it was a part of a theme where I would map out different locations that I need to photograph and build bodies of work up. And that's what I would pretty much do. Always having a theme in mind and then constantly going to the same locations over and over again to build that work and connect with people. And I read about these places when I was in the military. So when I came home, I was very interested about the West Village because I read about that in a book called Man-Child in the Promised Land. I said, okay, what is the West Village? So when I came home, I wanted to explore that. And then Harlem, I've heard so much about Harlem. I might have visited when I was young. I did go, but not as a photographer. But now studying the Harlem Renaissance and the impact that time had on that particular community, I wanted to close the gap and do my part to document Harlem. So I started to venture out and check out Harlem and connect with people. So I started just going to different locations out of curiosity because, again, I wanted to build up a body of work. I ventured off to the Bronx and I would just take the train. That's why a lot of my work is rooted in the train, because I'll just get on the train and just ride from the first stop to the last stop, walk car to car, switch over, document both the trains, and I'll look at a neighborhood that I found interesting, and I'll go down and I'll just start photographing it. I just had a serious, curious mind to explore. And again, I looked at the camera as a compass that just guided me. So I went with the flow.
Wow. What a journey. You must have so much work to track. What was your process for sorting and keeping track of all that work that you had?
I wasn't that organized back in the days, but I preserved many of my negatives. I've lost a small portion, which I left at my father's house and then got kind of like lost. But overall, I kept them in a case. There was no archival boxes back then. I kept a lot of my negatives in a suitcase, and I just slept on them for many years. I knew they were valuable. I didn't understand the fact that they would lose quality as time went on. They need to be secure. But I kept them in an archival box in my closet for many years until really 2000, when I decided to do back in the days, where I went into that suitcase and pull out these negatives and realized I had something special. And even the photographs were a part of the catalog because I was into getting prints made. All the images in that book came from photo albums. I dissected albums to make that book. So that's very interesting because one of the things that helped me to preserve the work was the photo albums, which I learned from my father to create these beautiful albums. And I had like hundreds of them till I have to this very day. But I would secure the negatives. And I'm so glad that I did because all those negatives are so valuable. And as I revisit those negatives now, I'm finding so many diamonds that I forgot all about. So a lot of my new work now was based off these negatives that I rediscovered. And it's due to COVID that really allowed me to slow down and look at all the work that's in front of me. So right now, I'm going through the archival process of scanning all of my negatives right now. And I just can't believe the things that I'm finding.
I can imagine. I mean, that's a full-time job all on its own. How do you deal with the creative block, if any?
It never happens.
Really?
I'm always...
Never?
It never happens. I love photography. When I step out my door, I'm looking to photograph. My life is rooted in photography every single day. I'm going through negatives and slides and I'm organizing ideas. So there's never been a time in which there's ever been a writer's block because, again, having themes in mind, I'm always has a focus. What I found with a lot of photographers, they lose focus because they don't have any particular themes. Or they might work with one idea that doesn't go anywhere, now they're stuck. But for me, I always have ideas. There's always events to go to. There's always places to go to. So it's never a moment where I'm ever bored. Even if I decide that I'm not going out, I might do some still photography in my home. You know what I mean? So I have a vast amount of work on different subject matters. I photograph books, animals, a little bit of everything, but I can't ever remember a moment in time when I had a block, other than when I was younger and I didn't have money to buy film.
I mean, I see how you use themes, and I think that I got to start doing that myself. Was there a time when your camera allowed you, great insight simply because you had your camera with you?
I'll say working on Rikers Island, because, I carried my camera during my whole entire time as a correction officer. And I wasn't supposed to do it, but my father told me carry your camera everywhere you go. So I decided that I'm going to be in this job for 20 years. So let me bring it in here and let me develop a strategy on how I could work this facility and document, have a visual diary of my experience. Because I didn't really do it in the military. So I didn't want that to happen to me with this new career. So I carried my camera as an officer, and my first strategy was to photograph my peers. And I started really when I was being investigated. I photographed my investigators. Then when I got called to the academy, I photographed my whole entire experience in the academy. When I was assigned to a particular facility in Rikers Island, I brought my camera there, and I started to feel things out a little bit. I said, let me start with my coworkers. Let me start with the brass. And let me gradually work my way into a housing area where I knew a lot of people at and start documenting that. But the average person would not even think about photographing inside the jail back then. I just felt it was something I needed to do. So that's one of the places that really gave me a lot of access, being an officer and having an assigned post where I could bring my camera every day and document life there.
Now, in preparation for this interview, I was fascinated to hear you mention how you used your photography to find a balance between the stressors of being a CO. Can you talk about that and how that helped your mental health?
I needed that balance so much because working at Rikers Island at that time in 1983, it was an extremely violent place. It was one of the most violent experiences I had in my entire life. You know what I mean? To be in the atmosphere of so many young people that were all at war with themselves, and even an administration that was at war with them. So it was very challenging, and I had to find a way to navigate through this here because the way an average day is two officers. One works behind the booth. One is inside the housing area with 60 prisoners, 30 on each side. And you have to deal with that. And you deal in a very violent situation. And it doesn't always work that way. I try to be a gentleman and respectful. I try to be a mentor to a lot of the young men and guide them. And sometimes, regardless of how you would conduct yourself, somebody's going to still get stabbed. They're going to get robbed. There's nothing that you can do about that. So for me, when I would leave that job, I left with my camera looking for joy, looking for love, looking for hope, because I felt the sense of hopelessness in that world. And it could leave you very bitter. But when I left and I would go downtown Brooklyn with my camera, I was searching for love because people often ask me, what was you looking for? And as I re-examine my photographs now, you see love, you see friendship, you see connections with people. I needed that to reassure me that there's a life outside this world. Because many of my coworkers, they fell victim to drugs and alcoholism because of the trauma of working in an environment. That was their outlet. For me, photography was my outlet. When I left Rikers Island, I went right into the street to photograph. And that gave me a sense of balance. It created a situation where I was engaging people on the street, letting them know, look, I just came from Rikers Island. That's not the place to be, because we're talking about the crack epidemic now, where a lot of people will fall victim to crack, both using it and selling it. So I'm out in the street now trying to sound the alarm to what I'm witnessing every day, because I'm looking at good people that fell victim that might have smoked crack for the first time and they got hooked. And I'm trying to talk to people about what I'm seeing to try to warn them that you don't want to fall victim to this trap. So that gave me a great sense of purpose, because if I didn't do that, I would have been very bitter. So again, throughout my whole entire career, going to and from work, I took pictures. Even when I worked in Manhattan on my lunch break, I took my camera out with me and I walked around and I got pictures before I went back to work, because I worked in the courts for 10 years. And that was a very negative, depressing place. And fortunately, I worked in Chinatown at 100 Center Street. So when I go on my lunch break for an hour, I would hit up Chinatown, Soho, Tribeca, and document, and then go back to work. So during the course of my lunch break, or even going to work, I would take photographs that would give me a sense of peace.
Yeah, I totally agree. Photography for me is therapeutic. Something else that I find really relaxing is chess. And I read that you enjoy chess as well. How and when were you introduced to the game?
Chess was one of the greatest gifts that were given to me, aside from photography. And it was given to me during my time in the Army back in the 1970s when I was stationed in Germany. And a good friend sat me down and taught me how to play chess. And that, to me, I looked at it as a game of life. And not only the physical game, but I looked at the idea behind chess. You know, having a plan, having an objective, being faced with opposition, understanding sacrifice, utilizing everything that's in front of you. So I incorporated the ideas of chess into street life with me. So before I would go what I would call a mission in the street, like say for instance, if I was going to photograph a major event, what I would do the day before, I would analyze the situation. I would look at what is my objective? What am I working with? How many rolls of film do I have? What is the weather conditions? Do I need to wear a raincoat? Where do I need to where are the different rest stops if I need to use the bathroom? Do I need to carry food with me? I would analyze the whole situation in terms of how I need to move. You know, what is what type of opposition will I be faced with, and how will I deal with opposition? So before I would leave my house, in many cases, I would play a few games of chess with my partner to get my brain right. Because it's like playing the game to get me stimulated, and now I'm alert. And now I'm ready to go out there and take care of business. And it was a combination between playing chess and working out. So that was a balance which I needed. I needed to play a good game of chess to get me sharp, and I needed to be physically fit to endure whatever I was going to be faced with out there in the street. And then I had to make decisions, you know what I mean? And sometimes, sometimes you may sacrifice. You might take a picture. Somebody might say, well, you got to pay me for that. So you can get into an argument with a person. You just, you know what? Let's go get a quart of orange juice and let's talk. You had to understand conflict resolution, because you might be placed in situations that are very dangerous. Like when I used to photograph prostitution, I needed a game plan, and it wasn't easy. When I first went out to the Lower East Side, I happened upon a scene that I photographed that almost turned into a very ugly confrontation. And I was walking through the park with a friend of mine, and I happened to see a young prostitute engaged in a sex act with an individual in a car. I raised my camera and I took the photograph, and she screamed, and the John pulled off. And then about 4 guys rolled up on me and surrounded me with the intentions on trying to harm me and my partner. So I told my man, let's go back to back. We got in a strong stance. And then I started to speak to the person who seemed to be the leader about what I represented. And through that communication, I was able to calm him down, and he felt my heart. And he was so moved by what I said to him, he granted me permission to document prostitution out there any given time. And I have a photograph that nobody even knows is a pimp and 2 prostitutes that I took that day. And it went on to be an iconic photograph of a gentleman with shorts on, with his tube socks, and he got 2 women to his left and right, and there's a little boy holding a cat. That man, that individual is a pimp, and both those women are prostitutes. I never knew who the little boy was, but that individual granted me the permission to come out there to take pictures anytime. And through his authorization, I was able to go out there every day without having to have conflict now, because I photographed him, gave him the pictures, gave the women the pictures, and it created a relationship. And it was bittersweet. And I actually call the picture bittersweet because it was sweet because I have access to connecting with these women and learning more about their occupation. The bitter part was the fact that I'm seeing these beautiful women selling their bodies.
Wow. I have an internal conflict within my photography, and I don't know, maybe it's the Catholic guilt, but it's when I'm wanting to capture homeless people. And how do you resolve that in your mind, capturing people in vulnerable states? I'm curious how you approach it.
I think when I first started, I was taken aback behind both homelessness and mental illness. And it's something that became a theme of mine. I was very curious about who these people were. Were they in the war? what led to this situation, and it really bothered me. And in my documentation of it, I was searching for answers. I tried to create images that provoke thought because I wanted to garner empathy too. I wanted the viewer not to just look at them as bums or alcoholics, but I want people to look at them as somebody's child who happened to fall victim to hardships. So I did it. I did it with an empathetic eye and heart, and I never tried to exploit anybody. You know, that's why there was times in which I would buy people coffee, or I would give people clothes and try to help them out because I just wanted to understand. And today I don't do it, but when I first started out, again, I'm returning back from the military. This is all new to me. I was seeing it on the train. I would see signs above the head to help tell the story. And I wanted to tell this story in a very respectful way to garner empathy by the viewer. So early on I did it, and I don't do it now. I really focus more on joy because it's really interesting. I did it so much early on. My father chastised me on it. And he could not understand why I focused my lens on some of the hardships, animal brutality, poverty, and things of that nature. You're like, wow, this is all you seeing? But I was taken aback behind it because my early work is homelessness, prostitution, and despair. But that's what I was seeing. I was really trying to understand. And he didn't really understand it at that point. But I never gave it up. I still felt the need to document it. And I worked in a homeless shelter. I spent some time at Ward's Island, which was a really interesting assignment for me when I first came home from the military, because that gave me an idea on how wide this thing was. Wow, we have a serious problem in this country. And I thought about my time in the service and billions of dollars that's used towards defense, but this government is neglecting, their own people. And that really bothered me. So I wanted to lend my voice and try to shed light on both homelessness and prostitution. So a lot of the subjects I picked, I did it because I wanted to enlighten people to what was going on. With the prostitution, I didn't want to exploit these women. I captured them in a very dignified way where you won't even know that they prostitutes. And I used those images to go to some of the local high schools to teach young girls about prostitution and being mindful of those men out there that might want to manipulate you. So everything I did with intentions to create enlightenment.
That speaks volumes to your character, to flip that situation for the greater good. When you went out, what was your strategy for breaking the ice with people?
Now, once I learned the art of communication, my strategy was to always have work with me, a comprehensive portfolio, and a business card, and engage people. Every now and then, I have somebody just wave me off and say, "Man, get out of my face with that," because they didn't know. It's funny because a lot of them will write me now and they say, "We regret doing that because we didn't know what you were doing." But I didn't really have any challenges. I look at what I did back then. I can't do it today. I used to place myself in what I call nucleuses. Like I would go to Times Square and stand on the corner of 42nd and 7th Avenue. And that would be my base. And then I would just engage people and just photograph people, and I would always find locations like that. But I understood the art of communication that, see, it's one thing to take a picture of a person without their permission. That's confrontational because now that person, why did you take my picture? I found for me, I'm going to study your body language. I'm going to see if this person is approachable. And then I'm going to approach you and break things down to you, who I am and what I represent, and then win you over and help you hear what I'm saying, but also see what it is what I'm trying to create. So in that manner, I never really had a lot of conflict with people because I broke things down. Like I said, every now and then, the biggest problem came from people that thought I took their picture. I might be aiming my camera this way, and you over here. Now you accusing me of taking your picture. Now you telling me that you want me to get rid of the film. Now I got to convince you that that's not the case. This is not. It ain't going down like that. But I've never really had a lot of problems because, like I said, my strategy was to ask. I don't really do that anymore. My photography is more documentary in nature right now, where I use a wide angle. But back in those days, I stayed with a 50 millimeter lens. And I never knew about the power of the wide angle until I talked to Bridget Freed, and she raised the question to me. She said, "What type of lens do street photographers normally use?" And I told her 50. She says, "No, they use a wide angle." And I never knew that. If somebody would have told me that early on, I would have always used a wide angle because it would have just spared me a lot of headache occasionally, and I would have got more in the frame. I was more up close and personal when I engaged people. But I really can't remember any situation where there's any conflict other than one time I was in South Beach and this woman, I took a picture without her permission because I had to get it, and then she got pissed and she started screaming and created a very hostile environment that I got away from. And that's when I realized I got to go back to my tradition when necessary to ask people permission, explain to them, and just accept no for an answer. So I can't really think of any other situations where I had conflict. I've had a pretty smooth operation, believe it or not, as a street photographer.
When you were taking these photos and creating these photos, were you using flash or were you using, some of them I can tell, but I'm wondering if what was your approach? Did you always carry the flash with you, or were you just doing available light?
It was a combination of both. It depends. There were certain periods I used available light because my father wanted me to master that. So I rolled with a lot of 400 film. When I was on the train, in many cases, I had a fast lens. So the ambient light was perfect for everything I needed. That's why I love the trains, because rather being on the train or on the platform, there was always the light was just always there. Unlike being above ground, it was changing. So that's why I love the train. So then in the 90s, I used a lot of fill and flash. When I understood the power of the fill and flash, I started to use that throughout a lot of my work in the 1990s. And even when I started to use my medium format, you'll see that I use fill and flash in a lot of situations.
I was recently at the debate here in Philly, the first debate between Vice President Harris and Trump. Where do you see activism in photography? Because some photographers don't want to go near that line, while other photographers see photography and activism as one and the same. Where do you stand on that?
I have to look at it that as a photographer, I have a responsibility, because in many of these protests, it's really about my community is under attack, whether it's police brutality, it's war. I feel that I have a responsibility to use my vision to address these issues. One of the things that, growing up in the 1960s and seeing the anti-war movement of that time period, it really inspired me. And I really saluted those that stood their ground against the war in Vietnam. So when 9/11 happened and America was on the verge of going to war with Iraq and Afghanistan, there was a lot of anti-war protests going on in this country. I wanted to be a part of that movement. I wanted to document it, and I wanted to use these images to represent ending the war, not starting this war. So I was very proactive out there documenting the anti-war movement from New York to Washington, D.C. I was there because I felt that my images can help bring light to this unjust situation. So I feel a great sense of responsibility to be out there to address issues that are really close to my heart, that I disagree with. I want to go and document. So I feel it's my responsibility that I have to use this gift, and I have to be objective in doing it, but I need to be out there. And not only if I'm not doing it, I have to inspire others to do it, because at this stage in my life, I'm not out there like I used to be. But I encourage a lot of these young photographers to go out there and document issues that are close to your heart, whether it be global warming, police brutality, migration, whatever it is. Go and document that and lend your voice.
I appreciate you sharing that. Now, on a lighter note, out of all the cameras that you have, if you had to pick one, what would be, your favorite camera and why?
Well, I'll start off with my Canon AE1. That was my baby. That's the one that I first got started with, and I really liked that camera at that time because it represents my early beginning and understanding shutter speed, aperture. So I carried that camera around for about 10 years. It was durable for what I wanted. My father was outraged because he was a Nikon man. He didn't speak to me for about 2 weeks because he could not understand why I got a Canon and my brother had a Nikon. But, I had it and it really worked. It was an easy camera to use back then. So that was one of my favorites. And I've used different cameras over time. When I started shooting a lot of black and white, I got a Contax G2. And I loved that camera for the automatic focus, and it was small and compact. And that Carl Zeiss lens really gave me crystal clear images. When I started doing a lot of fashion work, I picked up and I got my baby back here that I used for a long time. And I still can't believe to this day that I used this for street photography. You know what I mean? I just didn't understand it. But I got turned on to the medium format. I liked the big negative. I knew I was going to start doing a lot of exhibitions. So I knew that that this would supersede the 35 millimeter negative when it came down to blowing up my pictures at 16 by 20s. And I used this for a number of years in the street. I still can't believe it. Today, I got my I'm still rolling with my G2. I got my Sony R7 that I'm experimenting with. I got a bunch of other ones I haven't even used yet, But believe it or not, one of my favorite cameras right now, and I'm a little shy to say, but I like my cell phone.
Hey,
I'm
the best camera you have is the one you have with you, right?
I use all of them. So I keep a film camera, I keep a digital camera, I keep a cell phone camera. And I use them all for 3 different type of situations. Because when I shoot, I'm always thinking exhibitions. So when I do a lot of film, I'm always looking at images that I make. Can this be in a book or in an exhibition? With a lot of my digital photography, I do that for the people. You know, I like to show them the back and let them look at the picture in real time and see the smile. I like to forward the images to them in real time. You know, so I enjoy that. But I still have an appreciation for film, and I still shoot digital like I shoot film for the most part. I'm not in some. I might have said I'll share the photograph with people under certain circumstances, but when I shoot for me, I don't look at the back. I know that I got it up in here. And if my aperture shutter speed is set right and I press my shutter release button, I'm good. I don't have to keep looking back at the images to see if I got it. Because I'm so accustomed to using film that if everything is done right, you know that you got it. And I'm patient. I don't mind waiting a while before I look at what I have.
What are some future projects that you're really excited about right now?
Oh man, I'm working on 3 major projects right now, which I'm really excited about. Next year is going to mark my 50th anniversary. So I challenged myself, and I went to my publisher, Powerhouse, and I came up with an idea to do a book called Drama and Flavor. And that book is really about the idea of what I look for in a situation. I look for drama, I look for flavor in the subject. That's like the foundation of my work, aside from love and joy. And it's pretty much rooted in a lot of the editorial work I've done and the fashion work and some of the styling that I've done. So I'm going back to the 1980s to my most recent work. It's pretty much fashion orientated and styled by me. So that book is going to come out for Fashion Week in 2025. It's called Drama and Flavor. I'm really excited behind it. It's a star-studded book. And normally I don't really get into the stars, but I document a lot over time due to the fashion work that I've done. So there's Swiss Beats, Alicia Keys, Naomi Campbell, Dapper Dan, Forrest Whitaker, Jean Carlos Esposito, and a host of others that are going to be in this book. And that's going to make it different from any book I've done in the past. So I'm really excited behind that drama and flavor. And then a publishing company reached out to me on Instagram out of nowhere and really blew me away. And they asked me, like, what are you working on these days? And I says, I'm working on a number of projects, but I have a project I've been developing for about 40 years now, and I would love to see it come into fruition. And it's called Prospect Park, My Oasis in Brooklyn. And they heard the idea, they want to see some images, and I shared it with them, and they said we'd do it. So they agreed to do that book, which is going to be dropping spring of 2025 in celebration of my 50th anniversary. And I'm really excited behind that because that is a very unique body of work. Unlike all the work I've done in the past, aside from the subway work, which is diverse, my Prospect Park work is really unique. It's a combination of black and white color, digital, traditional film, a lot of landscape of images, environmental portraits. It's a very comprehensive body of work. Half of the book is shot with a wide-angle lens. So I'm really excited behind this publication of 45 years of Prospect Park. So that book is going to drop next year. And then my gallery came to me and they want to do a book in honor of my 50th anniversary as well. And that's Tashin. And that book is going to be it's a retrospective called Frozen Moments in Time. And that book is going to probably come out the end of 25 or 2026. And I'm really excited behind that book because being as Tashin, I'm going to go really deep. I'm going to go deep into when I worked in a homeless shelter, Rikers Island, my documentation of prostitution, and a lot of the other themes that I focused on throughout my career. The Nation of Islam, political protests, from anti-war movement to abortion rights. It's going to cover a lot. So that book is really going to be pretty much like a visual memoir. So I'm really looking forward to that because a lot of that work has never been shown before. I really sat on it for a while. Prostitution is a very delicate issue because I didn't want to put work out there that might have put women compromise their reputation as they moved on. But now with so many years passing, I think that it's kind of like timely, and I'm doing it in a respectful fashion. So those are the 3 main book projects I'm working on. But I'm also developing films right now because I have memory of a lot of things that transpired throughout my life. I developed a really powerful screenplay about my time in the military, about the dynamics of being in the service and how it's it's a microcosm of society. You have people from all over America in the military. And how do we coexist with each other? coming from two different geographical locations, and the hatred that existed back then. So I wrote something comprehensive about my time in the military, and I feel really good about it. It's something that America needs right now because it's not focused on one particular group. It's dealing with all of us, and deals with possibility. What if we all got together? Here you meet, I could meet a Southerner for the first time who never met a black person in his life, and now we're in the same room together. How can we find a common denominator where we can have a conversation with each other and learn?
Jamel, let's finish this out strong with some advice. What would you say to young photographers, and not just young photographers, but anyone picking up a camera trying to get into photography?
I think, I go back to my early beginnings. I looked at a lot of photography publications. I fell in love with images and image makers. So I think the more you start to look at work, your appreciation for the craft, it gets more intense. So take time and go to the library, even on social media. Study some of the greats. Study Gordon Parks, Steve McCurry, Philip Jones Griffin. Just study those photographers and just develop an understanding and appreciation for the craft. Go out to the exhibitions, I think, are important too, because now you get an opportunity to see what work looks like on the wall and see how photographers are being celebrated. And that kind of like makes you sit back and say, I can do this. Because before I really got deep in, before I started to publish books, I went to bookstores all the time. I would spend hours at Strand's, at Roselli Books, just studying photography books. And that helped to develop my eye and my appreciation. And then I would start going to galleries. And it's one thing to look at images in a book, but now if you go to a gallery or museum and see it on the wall, it kind of brings the idea of possibility into greater fruition. And I think that's important. And then when you pick up a camera, focus on subjects that really interest you. You know what I mean? If you embark on that journey, you can't go wrong. You might say, I love animals. So fine, create a theme of people and their animals. You know what I mean? You might say, I like twins. Come up with particular themes and focus on that. And I think with that gives you the motivation. You won't get to that dry point where you get bored because you always have these different ideas in mind. Carry your camera everywhere you go. This is not an easy thing to say because sometimes the family is so divided and broken. But I tell people sometimes start with your family. Start with the elders in your family. Start with the elders in your community. Not only photograph them, but get into the journalistic aspect and engage them in conversation too. But it's important to start with the elders so you can now create your own visual diary and continue the family lineage by documenting, because we need to document the families. And sadly, we live in a day and time in which a lot of families are broken up and people in pain, but it has to start someplace. So I tell people to create a visual diary of your life. You know what I mean? Your everyday life, just document your experience. It could be the train, it could be the street, but really focus on the elders in your community and use the camera as a compass. Realize that when you roll with it, you're going to meet people in life and take time to engage them. Just don't be quick to get the picture and step off. If the opportunity presents itself, engage that person in conversation. Because when I look at my life now and all the people I've had conversations with 20, 30 years ago, I have friendships with them now and they've enhanced my life. So look at it as a journey and just go with the flow and be respectful. It's very important that you be respectful, because what I find with a lot of young people, they might take a picture and keep it moving, and now the subject felt exploited. So it's important to take your time with a person and get to know people that you photograph. If the opportunity presents itself, engage people, introduce yourself, but study the masters.
That's great advice. Thank you so much, Jamel. I appreciate you, and thank you for all of your time.
No problem.
If you made it to the end, thank you. Hope you got something from the video. Let me know down in the comments what you found most interesting. And if you found the video remotely entertaining, consider giving it a like and maybe, possibly subscribing. But until my next video, let's keep creating.